Welcome back, CHP listeners from all over the world. Laszlo Montgomery here with the start of a new series here at the China History Podcast. What an ambitious topic to take on, right? This introduction to Chinese medicine will be long on history and not so much with the science. This isn't going to be a survey course on TCM. TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, is slightly more complicated than what can be expressed in a multi-episode podcast series. So starting here in part one, we're just looking at the history of Chinese medicine with a focus on the most important names, the groundbreaking texts, the legends from prehistory, and the transformation of medicine from superstition to science and reason. By examining the names of the most oft-mentioned physicians, both the legendary ones and the ones we have proof of life, we can start to get a feel for all the early incremental advances made in China in the field of medicine. We'll look at the Yellow Emperor and the Divine Farmer, Huangdi and Shennong. They were credited with the two most consequential medical and pharmacological texts of the ancient world, the Yellow Emperor's inner canon, the Huangdi Neijing, and the Shennong Jing, Shennong's Materia Medica, among other names it's known by. We'll cover all of that in part two. But Sima Qian stated the history of Chinese medicine began with those two. There's also going to be plenty of yin-yang theory, the five elements, and qi, and all the forces in the cosmos. You can be sure of that. A lot of these writings are pretty esoteric. What I hope to do with this series is offer anyone not entirely familiar with these concepts a kind of general understanding of the earliest history of Chinese medicine and, on a simple level, how China's physicians and compilers of medical texts progressed along the China historical timeline. Chinese of the Old and New Stone Age, like everyone else on the planet at that time, all had something in common. And that was they all got sick or injured and sought a cure for their malady, whatever it was. 100 years ago, our understanding of medicine and the workings of the human body and how it responded to treatment was rather primitive compared to today. So when we go back to the later Neolithic cultures of China, Yangshao, Longshan, Arlito, 7,000 years ago, well, you can imagine how comparatively little they knew. But I've said this so many times in past CHP episodes, you had to start somewhere. Even if you go all the way back to 4,000 BC, between then and the start of the Han Dynasty, end of the 3rd century BC, a lot can be learned over the centuries through trial and error as far as what treatments worked well for what ailments. The herbs, roots, and other available natural substances got sorted out over such a long period of time, and people learned through experience what killed or harmed you and what helped and provided relief. Often, necessity was the mother of invention. In a society where the bow and arrow was prominent, treating wounds received by this weapon or from the wild animals they hunted, well, you could be sure every imaginable treatment was attempted before one was found that offered the desired therapeutic effect on the injured. But that long ago, people weren't moving around like they'd start doing between the Han and the Tang dynasties. So some healer in a village in Henan might discover some incredible decoction to treat some skin disease or eye infection. But if he never went anywhere, the discovery remained where it was discovered. No one benefited except those people with access to the medicine. Even later on in the Zhou and Han dynasties, the rich and royal were the only ones who could maintain an entourage of physicians to tend to the illnesses suffered by themselves or their loved ones. But with China's millennia-long history, longest continuous civilization on the planet today, having those thousands and thousands of years of time gave them a running head start on the understanding of how the human body worked and how to treat it when something went wrong. And texts were written and put into compendia and were updated with every passing dynasty. So much was tragically lost, but the spirit of the original texts sometimes got to live on in some writing or by someone who quoted the lost original. Archaeologists have unearthed all kinds of artifacts that went back to the 6000s BC. Some of them indicate that if knowledge of medical science didn't exist yet, medicine was at least practiced. A lot of stone tools found suggest that they were used to treat or operate on the human body. These earliest medical instruments were pieces of stone and stone needles or hooks that were used to operate on patients or cure ancient afflictions. Most of these stone artifacts are medical or therapeutic tools called Bian stones or Bian Shi. You could go on Amazon or AliExpress and buy these things from hundreds of sellers. They call them Bian stones or Gua Sha Bian stones. These Bian stones are believed to be the oldest medical tools used in China. They were used to puncture the skin to expel disorders and maladies. Bian stones were considered a precursor to acupuncture. They went all the way back to at least Hua Tuo culture, 5,000 to 3,000 BC, centered around present-day Yuyao, Zhejiang province. Gua Sha stones came in all shapes and materials, and they're used to scrape the body, usually the neck, chest, and back. When a gua sha stone isn't handy, practitioners will resort to using a large coin. The scraping causes the capillaries underneath the skin being worked on to hemorrhage, and in the scraping process of the area needing treatment, one's face or neck or wherever, the gua sha process would encourage metabolic cell repair and regeneration, which would lead to healing. It was a common treatment for sunstroke, but was also used for other problems. Besides the Yellow Emperor and Shennong, the other great sovereign from mythical times was Fuxi. He's also considered one of these mythical gods of medicine for his invention of the 9 needles, or jiuzhen, the 9 different needles used in acupuncture. Among the other gifts bestowed on the Chinese people, Fuxi is considered the one who brought them acupuncture. And lacking certain knowledge gained through empirical medical treatment, China's earliest inhabitants had to rely on supernatural powers to treat their conditions. The figures who stood in between the afflicted and the supernatural spirits were, well, I guess you could call them China's first physicians. In English, they went by many names familiar to us: shamans, magicians, necromancers, conjurers, healers, witch doctors, and medicine men. In Volume 6 of Joseph Needham's History of Science in China, he divided the ancient medicine men into 2 kinds, orthodox and unorthodox. The unorthodox ones would be those who engaged heavily in alchemy and protochemistry. Their main diagnostic tool was divination, and often the most common treatments involved things like exorcism. These unorthodox shamans, or whatever you want to call them, went on to become the alchemists and feng shis of later times who specialized in, among other skills, feng shui. They also became magicians, innovators, pharmacists, and practitioners of what we might call the black arts. The Chinese character associated with the practitioners of these more unorthodox methods of diagnosis and treatment was Wu. From these earliest practitioners of Chinese medicine, these Wu, or shamans, evolved the orthodox practitioners of medicine. They were more scientific and used less magical ways to discern what was wrong with someone. There was a different Chinese character for these sorts. They became known as Yis, or Yishers. Even today, the word for doctor, Yisheng, contains this Yi character, which, in one of its early forms, contained the 7 strokes of the Wu character as part of the whole character. Later, this Wu element of the character Yi was replaced with the character for wine because medicinal wines became popular as cures and preventatives of many ailments. In its simplified form today, the Yi character doesn't look like either of the 2 versions, only retaining a portion of the original character. The Shang oracle bones contain inscriptions mentioning medicinal liquors, massage, moxibustion, dietary regimens, herbal medicines, or Bian stone acupuncture. For a period in early Chinese history, these Wu and Yi, or Yishers, competed for the same patients. But there came a time that people, usually the more educated, turned to reason and science rather than putting their faith and trust in superstition and the gods. Sometime in the Zhou dynasty was when a more scientific approach to medicine began to pull Chinese medicine in a different direction, leaving alchemy to go its own separate way. If you never checked out that two-part series on the history of Chinese alchemy, CHP 299 and 300, I invite you to give that a listen or a re-listen as a companion to this series. During the Axial Age, as Carl Jaspers coined it, 800 to 200 BC, as mentioned last time in that Guiguzi episode, it was a time of great advancement. Many of the classic texts of that age discussed matters related to medicine. The Book of Odes, the Shi Jing, well, you could find lists of medicinal plants. The Zhou Li, the rites of Zhou, same thing. The Zhou Li departed from the long-embraced black magic of the Shang. The text stated that internal disorders weren't related to spirits or demons, but to changes in the seasons. It stated that people had to adjust their lifestyles and what they ate according to the seasonal cycle. The Shanhai Jing, too, the classic of mountains and seas. That remains to this day a beloved work from the Warring States times. But like a lot of those Bronze Age texts, the Shanhai Jing didn't settle into a final form till the Han. If the record of the Grand Historian or the Chronicles of Zhou are a little too dry for you, the classic of the mountains and seas is a nice, fantastical look at all the history and myths from before the Qin dynasty. It's quite an interesting book to get lost in. But what I wanted to mention is that the Shanhai Jing contains a lot of references to Chinese medicines, mentioning 120 prescriptions, some of which are still in use today, though the lion's share were unidentifiable. Aside from that, it details a number of concoctions that gave the imbiber things like long life, good eyesight, sexual potency, relief from depression, and other common disorders. The Shanhai Jing was one of the earliest texts to list the recipes for these concoctions. Concoctions are made by mixing various compounds and ingredients that are put in liquid form and consumed like a drink. Decoctions, which were just as important in Chinese medicine, were various medicinal herbs boiled or simmered in water inside a kind of clay pottery ware. When you decoct something, you're extracting the flavor or essence of the beneficial properties of the ingredients. It was a more exact way of preparing ingredients compared to the Shang period when unprocessed flora and fauna might be used as some treatment. There were herbal decoctions, root decoctions, tree bark was also used, and this too all developed during the Zhou and evolved during the Han. And you could be sure, as the dynasties whizzed by, Sui, Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, these recipes were improved upon or weeded out if their efficacy was proven to be nil. Yi Yin, whose time bridged the Xia and the Shang, and who was remembered as another in a long line of benevolent and reforming rulers, well, he didn't rule as a king, but as a regent instead, preceding the Duke of Zhou in setting the example of relinquishing his state power once the king attained his majority. Well, aside from all that he's remembered for politically, Yi Yin was also mentioned as someone who knew his decoctions and was remembered for the medicinal foods that he created. The records of Master Liu Buwei, the Liu Shi Chunqiu, was the first text that mentioned a link between yin and yang, qi, and the five elements, something that would work its way into the center of Chinese medical science. We'll get to this in the Han, when all the forces, yin, yang, qi, and the five elements will be synthesized. By then, all these forces will be used to explain almost anything concerning the universe, all natural phenomena, and the human body, including how people got sick and how to treat them. And of course, how to live a life that stayed in harmony with all of these forces. These ancient books only concern the health of kings and elites, but it's a given they spoke for everyone, all humans being one single species and all. There were a number of legendary physicians who were mentioned in many of the old books. No one can say whether or not they were the best in their day or the most innovative, but they got written about and were looked back on by those who followed as medical ancestors and sacred cows from antiquity. In the mid-6th century BC, there was Yi He. Yi, again, means medicine, doctor, or physician, and He was his surname. Physician He is how he is remembered, and like Lao Tzu and Gui Gu Tzu, no one knows with absolute certainty if he existed in real life. But Zhuo Qiuming sure wrote a lot about him in the Chronicles of Zhuo. He mentions all about how Yi He, physician He, treated Duke Ping of Jin, who ruled there from 557 to 532 BC. And being included in such an important text as this one, physician He was honored throughout the ages by others who spoke of him, including Sun Si Miao, the so-called king of medicine, much later on in the Sui and early Tang. Physician He was viewed as this oasis of scientific empiricism in a barren land of superstition. With Yi He, as it's so often said, Chinese medicine broke with gods, spirits, ancestral curses, and demons as the cause of human illness, and began leaning more in the direction of natural causes. With Yi He, we get the theory of the 6 kinds of qi. He said disease was caused by too little or too much of the 6 qi forces: yin-yang, wind, rain, dark, and light. And an imbalance in any of these kinds of qi led to imbalances in the body as a whole system. Too much yin force will lead to cold illnesses. If yang is excessive, there will be heat-related illnesses. Wind in excess leads to illnesses of the extremities. Rain led to diseases of the abdomen, and so on. These times in the spring and autumn and warring states periods saw the very beginnings of philosophers and physicians digging the foundation for the cosmological underpinnings of human illness or wellness. You weren't just you. You were part of a whole system that worked naturally in harmony. This meant understanding medicine as a kind of cosmos in and of itself that called for the body to be in sync and in harmony with the phases and cycles of heaven and earth. A quick mention about the word qi. As we make our way down the history timeline of Chinese medicine, the matter of qi will take center stage. Many scholars have tried to name what qi is. It's been explained as the essence of all matter in the universe, the physical matter that makes up all existing things. Qi is often referred to as substance or the material force or life force. It was the fundamental universal substance in both Chinese cosmology and physiology. Qi, like protons and neutrons, are all the same. And for this sameness, all people and all things are connected with each other. Qi also became the medium that allowed one, for example, to actually feel the tactile sensation of pleasure or pain, hot or cold, and even extended beyond the physical to human emotions as well, to feel anger or happiness. Later philosophers will say that qi included both matter as well as the forces that control the interactions between matter. One other mansplanation of qi is the energy source that ensures the cohesion of the atoms and molecules that make up all matter. And all of these ideas about qi started to take shape during the 5th century BC. In the Chronicles of Zhuo, it says, quote, "Heaven has 6 qi. They descend to generate the 5 tastes, radiate to make the 5 colors, are called forth to make the 5 sounds, and in excess produce the 6 illnesses. The 6 qi are yin and yang, wind and rain, dark and bright. They divide to make the 4 seasons, form a sequence to make the 5 nodes, and make calamity when they exceed." End quote. Because the concept of qi made sense to educated people, the concept caught on and became an accepted reality. There may have been disagreements on how qi worked in the natural world, but no one denied that it was there, any more than we in our day reject atomic theory. All of these rough ideas first developed in the Zhou dynasty, a time when Chinese were gravitating away from the superstition and supernatural ideas of the Shang period, were taken to the next level during the Han, and that's when the first great leap forward occurred in Chinese medicine. Another of the great and celebrated physicians of this era was perhaps the one we hear about most often. This was Qin Yue Ren, but in popular Chinese history, he's better known as Bian Que, and he lived 407 to 310 BC. He was a legendary doctor who was sometimes called the Aesculapius of China. Sima Qian wrote at length about Bian Que in the Record of the Grand Historian, and according to the Liezi, he performed the first heart transplant. Bian Que was a wandering doctor who lived the Jianghu life, traveling throughout the land, and during his travels, he ran into many men and women like himself who were knowledgeable about the many natural cures for the main afflictions of the day, so he soaked up quite a bit of local knowledge that may have been percolating around villages, towns, or cities in China since time immemorial. And this sort of parallels the story of Lu Yu, who wandered around China learning all the regional secrets of tea and distilling his findings down in the classic of tea. So by the time Bian Que arrived in Qin state, his renown and reputation had preceded him. Everyone knew about the famous stories of Duke Huan of Qi and the Crown Prince in Guo state. The Duke of Qi ignored Bian Que's medical advice and ended up dying, and the heir to the Guo throne was given up for dead until Bian Que checked his pulses and declared him only comatose. And with a bit of acupuncture and an herb concoction, the prince that the people had given up for dead returned to life. Because of these and other legendary stories, Qin Yue Ren had earned this moniker of Bian Que, someone who had been one of the Yellow Emperor's best physicians. So by the time Bian Que, or Qin Yue Ren, showed up at the court of King Wu of Qin, it was quite a sensation. But it was anything except good news for the Tai Yi, or royal physician, Li Xi. He was the one at the Qin palace who was appointed to look after King Wu's health. As he has come down to us in history, Li Xi was not competent at all. He was an old-style physician who relied more on the old ways and was quite ignorant of all the advances in medical science. And compared to Bian Que, he was not even in the same sport, let alone the same league, as Jules would have told you. Once when King Wu hurt himself, Li Xi was called in to treat him, but after going through some regimen, there was no improvement in the king's condition. Then Bian Que was summoned, and right away he cured King Wu. So Li Xi was just seething that this venerable old healer, famous throughout the land, came to rain on his parade and ruin the good thing he had going at the Qin court. So in an extreme act of professional jealousy, Li Xi had Bian Que rubbed out. Assassins came and put an end to Bian Que's life. And he's remembered to this day as a kind of figurehead for that period in Chinese history. This was a time, late warring states, when there was more than enough medical knowledge floating around China whereby someone needed to organize it and get it all written down into books. And the vessel that contained Qin Yue Ren's wisdom was the Nanjing, the classic of difficult problems. Like everything else I'm going to mention here, this work was actually compiled during the Han Dynasty. One of Bian Que's claims to fame was his mastery of pulseology. Way back in CHP episode 205, I spoke about Dr. Ying He, who practiced Chinese medicine in eastern Oregon back in the 19th century. He gained wide renown among the many peoples of this frontier land who came to him for treatment, and that's how he treated these frontier people. He would feel the 3 different pulse points on each wrist. These 3 pulse points were the Cun, or inch point, the Guan, gate point, and the Chi foot point. And through applying various degrees of pressure on any one of these pulse points, someone trained in this 2,000-year-old practice could diagnose patients and prescribe Chinese medicine or lifestyle changes to cure them. This wasn't exclusive to Chinese medicine. It was also practiced in Islamic and Indian civilization. And Qin Yueren wrote the book on this art of pulseology. A century later, the next blip in the radar of noted physicians of Chinese antiquity was Chunyu Yi. Chunyu is one of those two-character Chinese surnames. Sima Qian writes of him in this Shi Ji that in 180, he began studying the writings of Bian Que. And just like Don Larson's always going to be remembered for that perfect game he pitched on October 8, 1956, Chunyu Yi is remembered for his 25 case histories, or zhenji. These were medical histories of 25 patients, both nobles and commoners, and they had a patient-by-patient case history from observation, diagnosis, treatment, results, and so on. Same as in our day. It was noted that of these 25 patients, 15 were cured and 10 were not. And this zhenji text of Chunyu Yi was written in the form of a dialogue between the patient and the physician. Chunyu Yi earned early repute as a healer. That's usually how it all began in that profession. Someone had a little knowledge and experience and went out healing. And all it took sometimes were one or two miraculous cures for the word to spread far and wide. And word spread to the king of Qi, and this king in Zibo, Shandong province, requested Chunyu Yi to come to his palace. Qi was one of those kingdoms allowed to exist under the Eastern Han. And just like when Qin Yueren or Bian Que went to Qin, jealous and bitter officials and fellow medical practitioners conspired to eliminate Chunyu Yi. As soon as he got settled in Qi, he was thrown in prison on trumped-up charges centering around his refusal to treat the rich and influential over the common folk. And he was sentenced to some gruesome punishment, but not execution. And Chunyu Yi's daughter came to the rescue and offered herself to the state as a slave and was able to get Han Emperor Wen to intervene in the matter of Qi and pardon Chunyu Yi and get him off the hook. Not much more to say about Chunyu Yi except following his work, the matter of maintaining case histories became an accepted practice in the profession. Next up were the three physicians of Jian'an, the Jian'an San Shan Yi. Jian'an was the regnal period from 196 to 220, Eastern Han Emperor Xian. This Jian'an period was that time in China when Cao Cao was in charge of all of northern China and the fortunes of the Eastern Han dynasty. These three physicians were Hua Tuo, Zhang Zhongjing, and Huangfu Mi. Hua Tuo and Zhang Zhongjing lived at the same time. Huangfu Mi came later during the Western Jin. Some of you Romance of the Three Kingdoms lovers might recall that part of the book when Guan Yu was shot by an arrow, and to distract himself while the doctor performed surgery on him, he used the arm not being operated on to play a game of Wei Qi. Well, that doctor performing this surgery on Guan Gong was Hua Tuo. He's been written about extensively in many of the ancient history books, the Record of the Three Kingdoms and the Book of Later Han in particular. Hua Tuo is given credit for being the first to concoct these potions that would act as a general anesthetic. Other than this milestone achievement, Hua Tuo is remembered for a number of observations and conclusions contained in the treatises he left behind or that were credited to him. He said illness was caused not only by internal forces, but by external ones as well. He wrote about herbal medicine and proposed new advances in its understanding. He got all tangled up with Cao Cao due to his widespread reputation as a healer. Hua Tuo was down in Han State and decided to answer Cao Cao's call to come to Wei. This warlord was suffering from either a brain tumor, migraines, or some other affliction that gave him the most powerful headaches. None of his physicians could remedy his medical situation. So Hua Tuo went up there and was able to treat Cao Cao using acupuncture and other means. But he made it clear brain surgery was going to be necessary. As the story goes, Cao Cao, suspicious that someone from a rival state, the state of Han, was recommending such a risky operation, well, he was certain Hua Tuo was out to kill him, so he had Hua Tuo executed. Luckily, before he was unjustly executed, Hua Tuo's wife had made sure to compile all the information from all the medical procedures Hua Tuo had performed. But unluckily, after his execution, Hua Tuo's wife burned all the original texts and they were lost. Lost they may have been, but they were referred to throughout the dynasties. But frustratingly, no extant copies can be found anywhere. Zhang Zhongjing, or Zhang Ji as he's also known, was another physician of the Eastern Han, who's remembered for his contributions to Chinese medicine, herbal medicine in particular. Bian Que was his inspiration. He lived from 150 to 219, the wretched but exciting final decades of the Han Dynasty. Zhang Ji is remembered for his great work, the Shanghan Zabing Lun, which, like a great deal of text from that time, doesn't exist anymore. But like it often is, those who followed Zhang Ji recreated what was lost, and it all got put into the Shanghan Lun, the Treatise of Cold Damage Disorders. In Chinese medicine, there are 4 classics of medicine, and this is one of them. His specialty was febrile diseases, those that involve fevers of the body. Bian Que was called the Aesculapius of China. Well, Zhang Ji, he got the Hippocrates moniker. Because of the disorder, famine, pestilence, and political chaos of the times Zhang Ji lived in, people were dying everywhere from mostly febrile diseases. This was the reason he chose this particular field of study. And his work, the Shanghan Lun, was the first comprehensive treatise on externally contracted diseases. And it also lists a great number of prescriptions. And to the best of my knowledge, it's the oldest or among the oldest surviving medical texts and the most commented on, and was revered no less than the Huangdi Neijing, Bian Que's Nanjing, and Shennong's Materia Medica, the Bencao Jing. It contains 113 updated herbal prescriptions from the Shennong Materia Medica, plus many additional compounds, all developed for externally contracted diseases. Zhang Ji's writings all concern treatments that used prescribed herbs, not acupuncture. And one other little tidbit about Zhang Ji, or Zhang Zhongjing, if you will. In the old Chinese folk culture, it's said that he invented jiaozi. Yeah, those dumplings, steamed, fried, boiled, gyoza in Japanese cuisine, were invented by Zhang Zhongjing. They were originally called jiao-er, and as the legend goes, Zhang Zhongjing, chancing upon a group of freezing cold peasants suffering from frostbitten airs, mixed up meat and other ingredients and enveloped them in this outer dough wrapper, sealing it like you see today in any number of dumpling joints or bags of frozen dumplings, and he cooked them up and served them to these freezing souls to treat their frostbitten airs. Just one of 1,000,001 legends that has stayed with us all these years. The last doctor I'd like to showcase is Huangfu Mi, Huangfu being his surname, another compound one like Chunyu Yi's. Huangfu Mi did all his great stuff during the early years of the Western Jin dynasty. He wasn't a Bian Que or Zhang Ji kind of physician who produced prescriptions and new methods to detect disease. Huangfu Mi is remembered as the writer of the Zhenjiu Jiayi Jing in 259, a time when Sima Yan was just getting ready to make his move and establish the Jin dynasty in 266. The Zhenjiu Jiayi Jing is known in English as the Canon of Acupuncture and Moxibustion. 12 volumes, 128 chapters. It covers the Zangfu organs, acupuncture, the meridians, the acupoints, disease mechanisms, diagnosis, and treatment. Huangfu Mi identified and classified 349 acupoints, 189 more than were found in the Huangdi Neijing. I'm sort of jumping ahead here since Huangfu Mi actually came after the release of the Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic, but I wanted to squeeze them into this episode that looks at the most celebrated and remembered physicians and scholars of Chinese antiquity and their role in medical science. The World Health Organization today has standardized 355 acupoints. Acupoints are specifically chosen sites on the body along the 14 major meridians. These are the locations important to the acupuncture process and acupressure. All of this I'm holding off until next episode when we focus on the Huangdi Neijing and all the minutiae of yin, yang, the 5 elements, qi, and the meridians. The Zangfu organs just mentioned comes from the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon or Classic. The 5 Zang were your liver, heart, spleen, lungs, and kidneys. And your 6 Fu organs were your gallbladder, stomach, large intestine, small intestine, bladder, and the so-called triple burner. This was the mechanics that comprised the digestive, cardiorespiratory, and urinary functions. So Huangfu Mi, what he did was an exercise that a lot of well-regarded scholars throughout the ages did. He made an exhaustive comparative study of the old texts concerning acupuncture. And he found a lot of information that was wrong or contradictory, and he took everything that had been produced up to his time in the early Jin and freshened everything up, eliminated the inaccuracies, and brought everything up to date to the state of the art as far as understanding of acupuncture went. And he did the same thing for moxibustion. I was going to get to that in the next episode, but anyone familiar with TCM knows what moxibustion is. But for everyone else who heard of it but didn't know what it was, or if this is the first time you're hearing about it, this is a simple explanation. There's a type of herb called mugwort, or aicao, and burning it on or near a specific meridian point on the body would stimulate the flow of qi, and it's often used in conjunction with acupuncture. There's a million videos available showing how moxibustion is used to treat patients. So Huangfu Mi is revered for his Zhenjiu, acupuncture and moxibustion, Jing Classic. It remains the earliest extant book of its kind that is dedicated solely to acupuncture and moxibustion. It was a house cleaning that saw the wrong and superfluous discarded and a reorganization that included all the empirical knowledge that had been gained over the past centuries up to this time in the early Jin dynasty. And just a small thing, but Huangfu Mi also co-wrote this rather famous book throughout the dynasties, and it was called the Lianyu Zhuan, the Biographies of Exemplary Women. That's exactly what it is, a Plutarch's Lives kind of a book naming exemplary women across a number of categories like, most matronly, obedient, wise, most benevolent. And there was also a chapter called Nie Bi Zhuan, or Depraved Favorites, sort of like a rogues gallery of notable women. You can bet it features all the greats and near-greats, with Mo Xi and Da Ji heading up the list. So, Huangfu Mi is remembered not only as a compiler of this long-lasting medical text, but as a scholar and writer as well. Like Zhuangzi, Huangfu Mi was another in a long line of modest, unambitious scholars who the government tried hard to recruit, but who didn't want to have anything to do with a government career. This book contained old and new therapies for 100 disorders of all kinds. And I guess you could say this about Huangfu Mi's canon of acupuncture and moxibustion. It acted as the bridge that took Chinese medicine from antiquity to a time that was long on healing and short on incantations and relying on spirits to come riding to the rescue. Now, rather than start talking about the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, let's hold off until next time. And we'll look at the popular traditions behind the Yellow Emperor, Shennong, and then look at the 2 classics that came out during the Han that served as the North Star as far as everything that had been learned by all men and women who made their great and incremental contributions. By the time of Emperor Wu of Han in 100 BC, Chinese civilization was arguably more than 2,000 years old already. Plenty of time to sort out all the herbs, roots, and other natural substances or minerals that cured a long list of afflictions. The Yellow Emperor's inner canon or classic took everything to the state of the art. I'm also going to mention the Huangdi discoveries from the Han tomb in 168 BC and in Zhangjiashan in Hubei, another tomb from 186 BC. These are directly related to the Huangdi Neijing as well. Yeah, and we'll just keep on going, and what you see is what you get. You're not going to get a crash course in TCM with this CHP miniseries. This will be more about the historical development, and when it comes to theory or anything that wanders into esoteric territory, I'm going to try and steer clear. Okay, anyone living or traveling to the south banks of Lake Erie? The Cleveland Museum of Art has an exhibition running now until January 7th, 2024. It's called China's Southern Paradise, Treasures from the Lower Yangtze Delta. It's the first exhibition in the West that focuses on the artistic production and cultural impact of this rich Jiangnan region, south of the Yangtze River. The collection was curated by the renowned curator of Chinese art, Clarissa von Spee. Go check that out if you find yourself in and around that great American city of Cleveland. All right, everyone, thanks for listening, especially if you made it this far. Thanks to all of you who answered the call to my urgent pleas to support me on Patreon or CHP Premium. 感谢, 感谢. This is Laszlo Montgomery signing off from Los Angeles, California on a gorgeous autumn morning. Take care, everyone, and I hope you'll consider coming back next time for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.